Nutritionalist and food scientist who's passionate about pickles and fermented foods. Welcome, Kriben Govender. Hello. G'day, Kriben.
Hi, thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for joining us. Now, Kriben, we often hear Heinz talk about the good bacteria in fermented food. So what is fermenting? What does it mean?
Fermentation is a very ancient process that our ancestors developed. And most people don't realise things like coffee or chocolate or Vegemite or red wine, they're all forms of fermentation that...
Some of my top 4 food groups.
You've just got Joe's attention in the biggest way possible.
It's true.
But the basics of it is essentially using microbes like bacteria or yeast or even mould to change the culinary aspects of the product, but also to preserve the product as well.
OK, so what does eating fermented foods do for our gut?
Well, fermented foods are amazing for the gut because they're teeming with beneficial organisms, but then they've got all these other beneficial vitamins and things like short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, which are all really beneficial for gut health.
OK, but for you, it's been bigger than that. Tell us what happened for you when you started eating fermented foods. It turned your life around.
Yeah, well, I think back about 8 years ago now, I struggled really heavily with anxiety and depression. And my journey with anxiety and depression started probably when I was a teenager, when I went on a really strong course of antibiotics. And I literally noticed that my personality had changed overnight, pretty much. Went from being really bubbly and happy to someone that was quite dark and gloomy. But then it all culminated, I was in the workforce, and as you move up in your career, the level of stress really amplifies, and I found that my life imploded on itself. And essentially I left the workplace, my marriage collapsed, I found myself in an apartment, I was away from my 3 beautiful children, and I was about to end my life. And the thing that really turned it for me was my children, just anchoring onto them to not want to leave that legacy for them. But then I really I almost MacGyvered it, and I thought, how am I going to sort out this issue with anxiety and depression that I'm suffering with? So I put my science cap on, looked at research, I found the GAPS work, Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride, Dr. Weston Price, and they, especially Natasha, talked about the connection between the gut and the brain. And seeing psychologists and psychiatrists at the time, they recommended going down a drug route, so to take a Prozac or Zoloft, but I didn't want to go down that path, so I started to look at things like fermented foods, and specifically one that changed my life was this particular product, milk.
Yeah. I was just going to ask, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us, because there's probably people who resonate with not feeling on top of their emotions, and I think it's really important we speak openly about that. It's interesting that you bring that back to antibiotics, because we're talking about gut health here. Can you touch on how you found that link between the antibiotics and affecting your good microbiome?
Yeah, absolutely. I was very fortunate at the time that it was the early days in terms of the microbiome research. And now we've advanced quite a bit in terms of understanding of the microbiome, but your microbiome is around 40 trillion organisms that live in the gut, and a lot of them are responsible for production of neurotransmitters like GABA, serotonin.
Which is why they call it our second brain.
Exactly.
So I think what's really important for people to understand is that if you are suffering poor gut health, that's why you start to feel that change in your mood and your emotions. So you're using these fermented foods to essentially get that good gut bacteria working, healing and sealing the gut lining, and then promoting that bacteria.
Yes, absolutely. So it starts with sealing the gut lining, making sure those tight junctions are really intact. And then the next step is to introduce as much of these fermented foods, which are also rich in fibre as well.
Now, you had something here in your hand. Can you run me through what these are?
Yep, so this is milk kefir. So it's a very ancient product that's thousands and thousands of years old.
Yep.
No lab can actually make this. This is really from nature. And so all people do is they make this type of yogurt called kefir at home.
Yes.
And then all you're doing is you're adding this culture to milk, and then it ferments it into a yogurt. But the beauty is you only need to get this once. You can get it from a friend or anybody, but once you have it for life.
And you can keep passing it on to new batches, essentially. And it creates a beautiful tart flavour to that, and you don't need to add anything else to it, so there's no sugars or additives like that. Now, what about this one? So I think this is a water kefir, is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of the milk kefir, you've got a very well-studied product with lots of preclinical research and also going into clinical research on the amount of good bacteria in there. But if someone's, say, dairy intolerant, you've got another one this originates from Mexico. Again, it's an heirloom culture. You can't make this in a lab. It's just from nature. And so it's great for people who are vegetarians or vegans. And all we're doing is we're using sugar and water and fermenting it. And these are very fast ferments. Like milk kefir is 24 hours and it's ready. Water kefir is ready in about 2 days.
And what's interesting, you said sugar, and there's probably people thinking, well, this is a sugary drink. It's funny, the bacteria eats and consumes that sugar, correct?
Exactly. So the end product will roughly have about 2% sugar left in it, so very minimal.
And Kriben, you found when you started consuming fermented food, your anxiety and your mental health changed almost immediately, or?
Within days, I started to notice the difference, but it's important to highlight that there was multiple things. So I increased exercise, I started meditating, I took up a Meisner acting course, I did the Alexander technique, so numerous things, but certainly fermented foods did impact how I feel. And what's really interesting, milk kefir actually comes from the word in Turkish meaning feel good. So our ancient people really knew that these things improve health and how you feel, but also it's all the neurotransmitters and GABA in it that actually make you feel good.
So do all of the fermented foods and drinks, do they do different things?
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So in what way do they differ?
Absolutely. So each different type of fermented food will have a slightly different microbial profile. For instance, the ones in kefir are the ones that actually produce a lot of tryptophan. So tryptophan is like a precursor for serotonin, the feel-good hormone. And then other things like water kefir, which are not particularly well studied, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, and kombucha is another one, where it improves people's psoriasis or even people with IBD. And then even like sauerkraut, you've got to think there's trillions of bacteria per serve of this product. So milk kefir has about 2 trillion per cup serve. Again, there's trillions in this particular one as well.
This is a great nature's version of a probiotic, which is absolutely incredible for your gut health.
Yes.
And one thing I always like to tell people is that health starts in the kitchen. So when you truly want to be healthy and happy, get in the kitchen and you make these things from scratch and things will really, really start to transform for you.
Yeah.